Pure and innocent, she whispered, "I've never done this before." And upon discovering her purity, the millionaire did the unthinkable. "Where are you watching from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to find out what decision changed their lives forever." The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was filled with expensive dresses and jewelry that reflected the light from the crystal chandeliers when she whispered those words that would change everything. Her cheeks blushed intensely, while her brown eyes, still moist with nervousness, sought refuge on the Italian marble floor. The scent of orange blossoms mixed with champagne filled the air at this charity gala, but for Michael, nothing else existed beyond this unexpected confession that had escaped from the trembling lips of the 22-year-old florist who timidly held a glass of sparkling water. "I've never done this before. I don't belong here," she had confessed with a disarming honesty that contrasted sharply with the calibrated conversations surrounding them. Emily had been hired only to decorate the event with her handcrafted floral arrangements, delicate creations that transformed carnations and jasmine into small works of art. Her hands still carried the delicate scent of rosemary from the last order she had prepared that afternoon at the Chelsea Flower Market, and her short, unpolished nails contrasted starkly with the impeccable manicures of the ladies circulating in the room. The simple navy cotton dress she wore had been lent to her by her neighbor from Brooklyn, as she would never have imagined that the event organizer would invite her to stay after completing her work. When Michael approached her for the first time, a 43-year-old man with slightly graying temples that gave him a distinguished air, offering her a glass of champagne which she politely declined, his eyes revealed a genuine curiosity that didn't match the cynicism common to men of his position. "Sparkling water, then," he had suggested with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes in a way that suggested he rarely smiled with such spontaneity. For 3 months, Michael had built an empire in the renewable energy sector, but his personal life was an emotional desert populated with empty relationships and calculated interests. All the women in his social circle seemed to follow the same script: studied smiles, superficial conversations about vacations in the Hamptons, and an impressive ability to casually mention their purchases on Fifth Avenue. When Emily confessed, with that disconcerting sincerity of someone who hadn't yet learned to measure every word, that she had never participated in an event of this scale, that she had never tasted Blue Point oysters, that she had never even visited a Michelin-starred restaurant, something awakened in him like a long-dormant seed, finally finding fertile ground. The 21-year age difference between them seemed insignificant in the face of the authentic connection he felt in that moment. "We're all strangers somewhere," he murmured, observing the crowd of guests moving like actors on a perfectly orchestrated stage. "Sometimes I feel more like a stranger here than anywhere else. We search all our lives for something authentic, while the truth often hides in the spaces between our established certainties," thought Michael as he looked at this young woman who, without knowing it, had just broken the first stone of a wall that he had spent decades building. The decision Michael made that evening scandalized his entire entourage. Instead of offering her money, expensive gifts, or the typical advances of men in his position, he did something completely different. He asked permission to know her world. He wanted to learn about flowers, the art of transforming something simple into something extraordinary. The life that Emily had built with so little and which paradoxically seemed so much richer than his own. The surprise on her face was followed by an understandable hesitation. After all, he was old enough to be her father, but there was something in the sincerity of his gaze that convinced her to accept. "You won't find champagne or caviar in my world, Mr. Anderson," she had warned with a little smile that revealed a hidden strength behind her apparent shyness. "Michael, please. And that's precisely what interests me. The absence of everything that's been suffocating my life for 20 years. The next morning, at 6 o'clock sharp, as the sun was just beginning to caress the rooftops of New York, Michael waited in front of the entrance to the Chelsea Flower Market. Dressed in jeans and a simple shirt, attire he had to buy especially for the occasion, as his wardrobe contained only tailor-made suits and luxury sportswear. Emily arrived on her old bicycle, her cheeks flushed from exertion and the fresh morning air, her chestnut hair tied in a messy bun. "You actually came," she noted with a mixture of surprise and amusement. "I gave my word," he replied simply, as if this explanation was enough to justify a millionaire CEO getting up at dawn to follow a young florist into the chaotic and noisy universe of one of the city's largest wholesale markets. The hours that followed were a revelation. Michael watched with fascination as Emily navigated between the stalls with the confidence of a dancer performing a familiar choreography. She touched stems, smelled petals, negotiated prices with a surprising firmness for someone who appeared so gentle. Each choice she made was accompanied by a story, an explanation that transformed simple transactions into life lessons. "These peonies, you see," she explained, gently caressing the flowers with their fleshy petals. "They represent prosperity and honor in Chinese culture. But for me, they symbolize patience. They take years before they fully bloom. Some things can't be rushed, even with all the money in the world." Michael felt the weight of these words settle in his chest. How many aspects of his life had he tried to accelerate, to force at the expense of the natural beauty of the process? He found himself looking at his well-groomed hands and wondering when was the last time they had created something tangible, something that wasn't just a number in a bank account or a signature on a contract. "Teach me," he asked simply, and Emily's smile in response was the first flower of an unexpected garden that was beginning to take root between them. The following weeks brought an unexpected transformation for both of them. Michael began to visit her regularly in the small flower shop she ran in Brooklyn, where the aroma of damp earth and fresh petals replaced the artificial smell of air conditioning in offices. His Brooks Brothers suits seemed completely out of place among the metal buckets and pruning shears, but he insisted on learning every technique, every secret about how to choose the perfect flowers. "Your hands are too delicate," Emily teased him one afternoon as he struggled to master the art of floral arrangement. "It's like you've never touched anything that could hurt you." "That's probably true," he admitted with a humility that surprised even Emily. "I've spent my life delegating anything that might be uncomfortable." His 43-year-old hands, accustomed only to signing contracts and typing on the latest generation keyboards, began to develop small cuts and calluses from handling thorny stems of long-stemmed roses. Each mark was like a badge of honor, tangible proof that he was venturing beyond the carefully established boundaries of his privileged existence. During this period, Emily discovered that her purity didn't reside only in her youth or her inexperience of luxury, but in her ability to find authentic beauty in simple things. She prepared herbal teas of lemon verbena and linden grown on her small balcony, and served them in mismatched cups that had belonged to her grandmother. "These cups have a history," she explained, handing him a slightly chipped porcelain decorated with hand-painted violets. "They've witnessed conversations, tears, laughter. New objects don't yet have a soul." Michael contemplated his own life, filled with perfect new objects, but devoid of true history. His Upper East Side apartment resembled a page from an interior design magazine, impeccable but strangely empty of any trace of humanity. "What do you see when you look at me?" he asked one evening, as the shop was bathed in the golden light of sunset. "An aging man desperately trying to cling to something fresh and new?" Emily stared at him for a long time, her brown eyes reflecting a wisdom that far exceeded her 22 years. "I see someone who has the courage to start over," she replied softly. "And that's perhaps the rarest thing in the world." In her world, Michael wasn't defined by his bank account or social status, but by his willingness to learn, to change, to make himself vulnerable. This perspective was as refreshing as it was intimidating. "You've gone completely mad." The voice of William, his childhood friend and financial director of his company, resonated in Michael's luxurious office. "A 22-year-old florist? Really? It's so cliché I'm almost embarrassed for you." Michael observed his friend through the steam rising from his coffee cup. He had known William for more than 30 years. They had attended the same prestigious schools, shared vacations in Aspen and Martha's Vineyard, celebrated every step of their respective careers together. Yet, at this precise moment, he felt like a stranger facing this man whose values suddenly seemed perfectly aligned with everything he was beginning to question. "You don't even know her," he responded calmly, surprised by his own serenity in the face of this barely veiled attack. "I don't need to know her," William retorted with a dry laugh. "I've seen dozens like her, young, charming, authentic, until they discover the number of your bank account." Anger rose in Michael like a wave, but he contained it, realizing that a few weeks earlier he would probably have held the same cynical discourse. "Emily has never asked me for anything," he said simply. "Not yet," William corrected with a condescending smile. But it will come. An apartment, perhaps. A car. Vacations. She's 22, Michael. 22. What do you hope to build with her? She'll want children, a family. Will you be ready to become a father again at almost 50? The questions infiltrated Michael's mind like a slow poison. He hadn't thought that far ahead, too absorbed in the magic of the present moment, in that sense of rediscovering himself through Emily's eyes. William was touching sensitive points that he had carefully avoided examining. "I don't know what I'm building," he finally admitted. "I just know that for the first time in years I feel alive." William shook his head with a mixture of pity and exasperation. "That's exactly the problem. You're going through a classic existential crisis, and you're projecting all your hopes onto this girl who could be your daughter. It's unfair to her too, don't you think?" These words stayed with Michael long after William had left his office. Was he being selfish? Was he using Emily as a mirror for his own dissatisfactions? The age difference, which he had so easily dismissed at the beginning, was starting to materialize as a tangible obstacle, not because of appearances or social conventions, but because of the practical and emotional implications it entailed. That night, alone in his large apartment with walls covered in artwork carefully selected by a decorator, Michael found himself examining a photo of Emily that he had taken without her knowledge as she worked, focused on an arrangement of lilies and eucalyptus. The purity of her profile, the intensity of her gaze, the delicacy of her movements, all this suddenly seemed infinitely precious and painfully ephemeral. "Sometimes the most meaningful paths are those that frighten us the most," he thought as he turned off the light, letting darkness envelop his doubts like a shroud. However, the abyss between their worlds began to manifest in unexpected ways. 6 months after their first meeting, when Michael finally took her to meet his family during a formal dinner at the family's Upper East Side townhouse, the contrast became painfully evident. His mother, Elizabeth, an elegant woman whose face rarely expressed approval, examined Emily with the clinical gaze of someone evaluating a questionable investment. The questions came disguised as kindness, about her education, about her family from Pennsylvania, about her ambitions. "So you didn't pursue higher education?" Elizabeth asked as she delicately cut her Dover sole. "No, ma'am," Emily responded with quiet dignity. "I started working at 16 after my floristry apprenticeship." "Fascinating," Elizabeth commented in a tone that suggested exactly the opposite. "And your parents approve of this relationship?" Michael felt Emily stiffen slightly beside him. He knew that her parents, a postal worker and a healthcare assistant from Lancaster, had expressed their own concerns about the age and social status difference. "My parents trust me to make my own decisions," Emily replied with a confidence that impressed even Michael. It was when Elizabeth commented, with a barely disguised hint of venom, on the age difference, "My son is 43, dear. He could be your father," that the true judgment was revealed. Each honest answer from Emily seemed to amplify the icy silence that dominated the dining room, decorated with antiques that cost more than her entire flower shop. Michael observed with a mixture of pride and apprehension how she maintained her composure in the face of this thinly veiled interrogation. "Michael has always had a weakness for the exotic," his sister Catherine interjected, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But generally these experiences don't last." Michael felt a cold anger rising within him. Was this how they saw him? A man incapable of depth, constancy, true transformation? "This is not an experience," he said, finally breaking his silence. "Emily has taught me more in 6 months about beauty, patience, and authenticity than all of you have in 4 decades. A shocked silence followed his declaration. Never before had he defied his family's established order, always preferring to maintain an appearance of conformity even when he disagreed. "Michael, darling," Elizabeth resumed, as if speaking to a capricious child, "we're not questioning your feelings. We're simply concerned about the practicality of all this. Miss Parker is undoubtedly charming, but she hasn't been prepared for our world." What no one expected was that Emily wouldn't yield. When Elizabeth suggested, with venom barely disguised as maternal concern, that perhaps a 22-year-old girl was somewhat out of place with a 43-year-old man, the florist raised her chin and responded with a dignity that made the air in the room seem denser. "Mrs. Henderson," she began in a calm but firm voice, "I know exactly who I am and where I come from. My calloused hands represent honest work since the age of 16. I understand your concern for your son, but if Michael cannot proudly introduce me to his family, then perhaps it's best that each of us follow our own path. The silence that followed was interrupted only by the sound of her chair pushed back from the table as she rose to leave. But that's when Michael did the unthinkable for the first time. He also stood up, positioned himself beside Emily, and in front of his shocked family, declared that for the first time in 43 years, he had found something real, something that couldn't be bought or negotiated. His voice, normally firm in boardrooms, trembled slightly when he said that he was ready to rebuild his entire world around this new truth. The expression on Elizabeth's face went from incredulity to contained fury, but he had already taken Emily's hand and was heading toward the massive oak door. "If you leave this house now, Michael," Elizabeth launched as an ultimatum, "don't expect the doors to remain open to you." Michael paused for a moment, the weight of 4 decades of conditioning and family expectations heavy on his shoulders. "Then I'll learn to live without them," he replied simply before crossing the threshold. In the car that was taking them back to Emily's small apartment, silence was heavy with unspoken words. Michael drove, his eyes fixed on the road, trying to understand himself the magnitude of what he had just done. "You shouldn't have done that," Emily finally murmured, her eyes bright with restrained tears. "Your family is important. So are you," he replied simply, realizing with surprise the deep truth of these 2 words. "And perhaps that's precisely what my family needs to understand. Sometimes we must choose not between good and bad, but between 2 equally valid truths," he thought as he took Emily's hand in his, feeling the warmth and life pulsing beneath her skin. The months that followed tested them both in ways neither had anticipated. Michael faced pressure from his social and professional circle, where malevolent whispers questioned his mental health and speculated about a late, mid-life crisis. "I don't recognize you anymore," James, a longtime associate, confided during a business lunch at Per Se. "You cancel crucial meetings for what exactly?" "Playing florist with a young girl." Michael contemplated his glass of Napa Valley Cabernet, wondering how to explain to this man who measured success only in terms of profit and power that he had discovered a form of wealth that couldn't be quantified. "I'm reorganizing my priorities," he responded simply. "You built this company for 20 years, James insisted, "and now you seem ready to throw everything out the window for a whim." Colleagues joked about middle-aged men and young girlfriends, suggesting he was trying to recapture a lost youth. He lost important contracts with investors from Chicago and Los Angeles, who considered his romantic choice as proof of compromised judgment. His bank account, although still substantial, began to feel the impact of his decisions, especially when he chose not to attend strategic meetings to help her during the busy season of weddings and communions that filled the flower shop. One Tuesday afternoon, as he was helping prepare an order for a wedding at the Botanical Garden, his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Finally, he answered to hear the panicked voice of his assistant. "Mr. Anderson, the board of directors demands your presence. The Japanese are threatening to withdraw their investment if you're not here within an hour." Michael looked at his hands covered in soil and stem fragments, then observed Emily, who was working with concentration on a complex floral arch, her hair held back by a simple headband, beads of sweat purling on her forehead. "Tell them I have a commitment that I cannot break," he replied after a moment of silence. "But sir, it's millions of dollars." "I know exactly what it is," Michael interrupted, "and I also know what I'm choosing." Emily, for her part, was facing insecurities she had never known before. Customers began to appear in her shop, not for the quality of her work, but out of morbid curiosity to see the little one who caught the millionaire. "It's really perverse, don't you think?" Jennifer, a former schoolmate who pretended to come buy flowers for her mother's birthday, threw at her one day. "You who always preached authenticity, and now you're dating a man who's your father's age." Emily felt the sting of these words, but she forced herself to maintain her calm. "Authenticity has nothing to do with age," she replied, meticulously arranging ranunculus in a bouquet. "It's about the truth of feelings, intentions." "Sure," Jennifer sneered, "and the fact that he's a millionaire is just a coincidence, I guess." Some women made acerbic remarks about the convenience of finding someone rich and established when you're only 22. Others whispered that she was too immature, that the relationship wouldn't last. that 43-year-old men who dated such young girls had ulterior motives. Each whisper, each judging look, planted seeds of doubt in her heart. Was she mature enough for this world? Was Michael truly in love or simply going through a phase? Would he end up noticing the age difference and replacing her with someone from his own circle? One evening as they dined in Emily's small apartment, she finally asked the question that was tormenting her. "Do I embarrass you?" she asked abruptly, interrupting a conversation about a documentary they had watched together. Michael looked at her, surprised by this sudden question. "Embarrass me? How could you embarrass me?" "In your world," she specified, nervously playing with her fork. "Among your friends, your colleagues. I know what they say. That I'm too young, that I don't understand your world, that I'm a whim." Michael put down his fork and took a moment to reflect, knowing that a hasty answer wouldn't suffice. "What I feel with you has nothing to do with embarrassment," he said finally. "It's rather a clarity I've never known before, as if I'm finally seeing things as they are, without the filters I've spent decades building." He extended his hand across the table to take hers. "I'm not blind, Emily. I see the looks, I hear the comments, but what matters to me is that for the first time in my life, I'm making a choice based on what truly makes me happy, not on what impresses others." Her eyes filled with tears that she tried to hold back. "I'm afraid," she finally admitted. "Afraid of not being good enough. Afraid that you'll wake up one morning realizing that you've sacrificed too many things for an ordinary girl who has nothing exceptional to offer you." "You don't need to be exceptional," he murmured, wiping away a tear that had escaped and was now running down her cheek. "You just need to be yourself. That's already more than enough. We often fear not being enough, when our greatest fear should be never discovering our own worth," he thought, as he looked at her, fragile and strong at the same time in her vulnerability. Rain was falling like a grey curtain over New York that evening. Michael was in his office, finishing reviewing an important contract, when his phone vibrated. Emily's message was brief and alarming. "The shop is flooded. Everything is ruined." Without taking time to close his computer or grab an umbrella, he rushed to his car. The drive to Brooklyn, usually 20 minutes, seemed to last hours as he slalomed through traffic jams, his mind filled with images of destruction. When he finally arrived at the small shop, the scene that greeted him broke his heart. Water had invaded the space, transforming the floor into a shallow lake where petals, stems, and pieces of paper floated. The arrangements prepared for a wedding scheduled the next day lay in ruins, their vibrant colors diluting in the muddy water. In the midst of this chaos, seated on a slightly elevated chair, Emily contemplated the destruction with an empty gaze. Her clothes were wet, her hair plastered against her pale face. "My God, Emily," Michael murmured as he waded toward her. "A pipe burst," she explained in a surprisingly calm voice. "I was finishing the arrangements for the Wilson wedding when the water started rising. I couldn't save anything." Michael looked around, rapidly assessing the damage. Months of carefully selected stock were lost. The refrigerators containing the most precious flowers had been damaged by water. Papers and invoices on the small desk floated like paper boats in a child's puddle. His first instinct was to take out his phone, call a professional cleaning company, solve the problem as he solved all problems in his life, with money and efficiency. But something in Emily's expression stopped him. This wasn't just a material catastrophe, it was the collapse of a dream she had built piece by piece since she was 16. Instead of offering money to solve the problem, or taking control of the situation as an older man might have done, he simply sat next to her in the dirty water, ruining his English wool suit, and held her hand as she cried. At that moment, there was no age difference, just two souls sharing a pain. "I'm sorry," she finally sobbed. "You don't have to stay in this dirty water. Your suit—" "It's just a suit," he responded simply. "There are hundreds like it in stores. But you're irreplaceable." They stayed like that for what seemed like hours, letting the reality of the situation settle between them. Then, slowly, Michael stood up and held out his hand to Emily. "Come," he said gently. "The first step is to get all this water out. Then we'll see what can be saved." "We?" she questioned with a sad little smile. "You have a board of directors to lead tomorrow morning." "I have priorities to manage now," he corrected. "And you're at the top of that list." But it was in the hours that followed that Michael showed who he truly was. He didn't call professional cleaning companies, but his friends from the Manhattan Athletic Club, his business associates, all those from his privileged social circle. And he said something that resonated like an earthquake in his world. He needed real help, hands-on, without cameras or publicity, to help the woman he loved. To Emily's surprise, some came. Executives in improvised casual attire began carrying buckets, drying surfaces, and saving what could still be recovered. For the first time, she saw that Michael wasn't simply living a fantasy with a younger woman. He was genuinely committed to building bridges between their worlds. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked as they worked side by side to mop up the water. "You could simply buy me a new shop. It would be so much simpler." Michael stopped, a mop in hand, and looked at her with an intensity that made her shiver. "Because I don't want to be the man who solves your problems with money," he replied. "I want to be the man who stands by your side when things are difficult, who works with you to rebuild, who understands the value of what you've created." He made a gesture encompassing the devastated shop. "This place isn't just a business, Emily. It's your soul, your vision. I don't want to replace it. I want to help restore it, to make it even stronger than before." Something changed in Emily's gaze at that moment, a deep recognition of the real man standing before her, beyond his age, his social status, his wealth, a man ready to get his hands dirty, to risk ridicule in the eyes of his peers, to sacrifice his comfort for something, someone he truly valued. "I love you," she said simply, the words escaping before she even realized she was thinking them. Michael felt these words resonate within him, like a truth he had waited for all his life without knowing it. "I love you too," he replied, surprised by the ease with which these words, which he had always found so difficult to pronounce, now flowed. "And we'll rebuild together. True love doesn't reveal itself in moments of joy, but in those of devastation, when everything superficial has been washed away, leaving only the essential," he thought as he drew her to him, their wet clothes mingling in an embrace that promised a new beginning. The unthinkable happened again when, 8 months after that first meeting at the charity gala, Michael made a decision that left his family and social circle in a state of absolute shock. He sold his Upper East Side apartment and bought a commercial space in Brooklyn, not to install a franchise of his company or make a strategic investment, but to create something completely new, a community center that would offer free gardening and floral art classes for socially vulnerable youth. Emily's flower shop would be relocated to one of the spaces, but the main objective would be to give boys and girls her age the same opportunity she had had to find beauty and purpose through plants and flowers. The news spread like wildfire. Economic magazines like the Wall Street Journal questioned his strategy, suggesting that a 43-year-old man was making irrational choices for a 20-year-old girlfriend. Digital influencers debated whether it was a sincere gesture or a desperate attempt to impress someone younger. But the most serious consequences came from his company. During an emergency board meeting, specially convened to discuss his erratic behavior, Michael found himself facing an ultimatum. "We've all been patient," began Robert Turner, the chairman of the board, a 60-year-old man with a severe face. "We've tolerated your recent distractions in consideration of your years of exemplary leadership, but this latest decision crosses a line." Michael observed the faces around the table, men and women with whom he had built this company, shared victories and defeats, sacrificed countless hours of his personal life. Now they were looking at him like a stranger, like someone who had betrayed their collective trust. "This community center is a personal project," he responded calmly. "It won't affect my responsibilities to the company." "That's exactly the problem," exclaimed Turner, slamming his hand on the table. "Your personal projects have already affected your responsibilities. You missed 3 crucial meetings last month. The Japanese contract was almost lost because of your absence. And now you're squandering your personal capital on a community garden?" "It's not squandering," Michael corrected. "It's an investment in something that makes sense, that helps young people who haven't had the same opportunities we've had." An incredulous laugh ran through the room. "And this has nothing to do with your florist girlfriend?" asked Sarah Mercer, Director of International Operations, sarcastically. "Let's be honest, Michael. You're going through a personal crisis, and you're compromising everything we've built to impress a girl half your age." Michael felt a cold anger rise within him, but he contained it, knowing that the emotional explosion they all seemed to be expecting would only confirm their suspicions about his instability. "My relationship with Emily may have been the catalyst for a change in my perspective," he admitted, "but this change was necessary and is authentic. I've spent 20 years building a company that generates profits, but I've neglected to build a life that generates meaning. I'm only correcting this imbalance." Turner shook his head, as if Michael were a hopeless case. "The board has voted," he finally announced. "You have two choices. Refocus your attention exclusively on the company, abandon these distractions, or will be forced to re-evaluate your position as CEO." The silence that followed this statement was heavy, with 4 decades of history, expectations, and compromises. Michael looked at each face around the table, seeking an ally, a glimmer of understanding. He found none. "You're asking me to choose between my life's work and my life itself," he said finally, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "We're asking you to behave like the leader you've always been," Turner corrected, "to put the company and its thousands of employees before your personal whims." Michael rose slowly, gathering the documents in front of him with deliberate gestures. "I'll let you know my decision tomorrow," he said before leaving the room, the weight of an impossible choice weighing on his shoulders. That night, in the small apartment that Emily and he now shared above the new shop, he couldn't find sleep. Beside him, Emily slept peacefully, her face relaxed in the abandon of sleep, unaware of the torment agitating the man at her side. How to choose between two parts of oneself, he wondered as he contemplated the ceiling. The company he had built wasn't just a workplace, it was the fruit of his vision, his ambition, his sacrifices. But Emily and the transformation she had catalyzed in him represented something equally precious, a chance at redemption, at discovering a version of himself he had never known, a version capable of authentic and selfless connection. The choice seemed impossible, but deep down Michael already knew which path his heart had chosen. The deepest sacrifice was yet to come. When his renewable energy company went through a crisis, after he refused a massive investment from a fund that demanded his exclusive attention and the end of his personal philanthropic projects, Michael was forced to choose. He could maintain the empire he had built for 20 years, or he could preserve the integrity of the life he now shared with Emily. During sleepless nights, she observed him struggle with this decision, seeing the tension on his mature face, the worry lines deepening. She offered to release him from any commitment, said he had worked his entire adult life to build this and shouldn't throw it all away for a 22-year-old girl. "I don't want to be the one who makes you lose everything," she whispered one night, as he stared at financial projections on his laptop, the numbers dancing like ominous omens on the bluish screen. "You're not making me lose anything," he replied without looking up. "You've helped me see what truly matters." "But this company is your legacy," she insisted, sitting next to him on the used sofa they had bought together at a flea market. "You built it from nothing." Michael finally closed his computer and turned to her, his face marked by exhaustion but also by a strange clarity. "What's the value of a legacy if I lose my soul in creating it?" he asked softly. "For 20 years I've built something I thought was important, but it was just an empty structure, with no true purpose beyond growth and profit." He took her hands in his, observing the contrast between her delicate but worked fingers and his own larger hands, already marked by time, but only now beginning to know true work. "You've shown me that there's another way to measure success," he continued. "By the positive impact we have on others, by the authenticity of our relationships, by the beauty we create in a world that's often cold and calculating." That's when he did the unthinkable. He chose to completely restructure his company, to downsize it, to share control with partners who believed in his new vision, and to accept that his life would no longer be defined by numbers on a bank account. The decision was announced at a press conference that made headlines in all the financial newspapers. Michael Anderson, once considered one of the most promising entrepreneurs of his generation, was stepping down from the operational management of his own company to dedicate himself to social impact projects. The cost was real and tangible. Michael lost more than half his fortune in the restructuring. His name disappeared from the lists of the most influential young millionaires in Forbes magazine. After all, at 43, he was no longer so young. Old friends stopped responding to his calls. His mother, Elizabeth, sent him an icy letter informing him that he had been removed from her will, considering that he had wasted the Anderson legacy for a youthful whim. The weeks that followed were among the most difficult of his life. For a man who had defined his identity through professional success for 4 decades, the transition to a more modest existence, centered on a community project that many doubted, was brutal. Doubts insinuated themselves into his mind at the most unexpected moments. Had he made a monumental mistake? Would he end up regretting having sacrificed his life's work for a relationship that, statistically, had little chance of lasting? These questions tormented him particularly at night, when the certainties of the day faded in the darkness of forced introspection. One evening, while Emily was already asleep, he went out onto the small balcony of their apartment and contemplated the lights of New York, this city that had witnessed his glory and now his fall. A voice made him start. "Can't sleep?" asked Emily, wrapped in a shawl, her hair tousled from sleep. "Too many thoughts," he admitted, gratefully accepting her presence at his side. "Regrets?" she asked directly, always that brutal honesty that had initially attracted him to her. Michael thought long before answering, wanting to be as honest with her as she had always been with him. "Adjustments," he finally corrected. "I don't regret my choices, but I must admit that some aspects of the transition are harder than I had anticipated." She rested her head against his shoulder, her young, warm body against his, older and tired. "You know you can always go back," she said softly. "They'd take you back in a heartbeat. You're still Michael Anderson." "That's exactly what I don't want," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "I don't want to be still Michael Anderson. I want to be someone new, someone better." They remained like this in silence, contemplating the city together, each lost in their own thoughts, united by a choice that had cost so dearly, but which, paradoxically, had liberated something precious in him. We think our greatest losses are material, while it's often our illusions that cost us the most to maintain, thought Michael as he held Emily close, finding in her simple presence an anchor that all his past fortune had never managed to offer him. Michael's transformation had a price that neither he nor Emily had fully anticipated. The small luxuries he had always taken for granted, the starred restaurants, the spontaneous vacations to the Caribbean or Paris, the tailor-made clothes, disappeared from his life. It wasn't that he could no longer afford them. He still had considerable resources despite his recent losses, but these things now seemed out of place, almost obscene in his new perspective. One Sunday morning, as he prepared coffee in the small kitchen of their apartment, a revelation struck him. He was happier now, preparing a simple breakfast in this modest space, than he had ever been in his luxurious penthouse with his private chef and panoramic view of Central Park. This realization should have been comforting, but it opened the door to an unexpected anguish. What if Emily, who had never known the luxury he had renounced, ended up one day regretting it for her? What if she woke up at 30, realizing that she had tied her life to a man now in his 50s, who had made her miss experiences that her youth deserved? These thoughts began to obsess him, creating a subtle distance between them that Emily couldn't fail to notice. "You've been absent lately," she told him one evening as they walked along the East River, their fingers intertwined, but an invisible tension floating between them. "Physically present, but your mind is elsewhere." Michael stopped, watching the reflections of the streetlights dancing on the dark water of the river. "I'm afraid," he admitted, the words coming out before he could hold them back. "Of what?" she asked, turning to face him, her eyes seeking his. "Of stealing your youth," he said finally. "I've had my chances, my experiences. I've traveled, I've built a career, I've lived all those things that people in their 20s are supposed to live. And now, because of me, you're tied to a man who has given up all that, who is dragging you into a more constrained life." Emily looked at him for a long time, her face moving from surprise to deep understanding, then to something that strangely resembled amusement. "You think I regret not being able to order $500 bottles of champagne?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. "Not now," Michael corrected. "But maybe someday, when the novelty of all this fades, when you realize that you've tied your life to someone who will be an old man while you're still in your prime." Emily took his face in her hands, a gesture both tender and firm. "Michael Anderson," she said seriously, "I've never wanted yachts or Hamptons villas. I've never dreamed of expensive jewelry or luxury cars." She paused, searching for the right words. What I've always wanted is exactly what we're building together. A meaningful life, work that makes a difference, authentic connections with other human beings. If I had wanted the superficial version of success, I could have found another rich man who wouldn't have questioned his own existence. She let out a small laugh. And frankly, I find it rather condescending that you presume to know what my youth deserves, as if all 20-year-olds aspired to the same things. Michael felt the truth of her words penetrate him like warm rain after a long drought. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "You're right. I'm projecting my own fears." "Exactly," she confirmed, taking his hand to continue their walk. "You're worried that I'll regret the things you've given up, while I never gave them value." They walked in silence for a moment, the sound of their steps on the pavement creating a reassuring rhythm. "You know what would really make me regret my youth," she finally resumed. "Wasting it chasing empty appearances, trying to impress people I don't even like, accumulating possessions that mean nothing." She stopped, turning again to face him, her face illuminated by the soft light of the street lamps. "You haven't stolen anything from me, Michael. You've offered me something much more precious than all the luxuries in the world. Permission to be authentically myself, to build a life aligned with my true values." That evening, as they returned to their modest but cozy apartment, Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had spent so many years measuring his worth through external metrics, success, wealth, prestige, that he had almost forgotten how to evaluate what truly mattered. "We spend half our lives acquiring things we spend the other half trying to free ourselves from," he thought, as he watched Emily prepare a simple herbal tea in their kitchen, an ordinary gesture imbued with extraordinary beauty in its very simplicity. Spring arrived in New York with an explosion of colors and new life. The cherry trees in Central Park covered themselves with delicate pink flowers, and cafe terraces came alive again after the winter torpor. For Michael and Emily, this season also marked the first anniversary of the community center they had created together. What had begun as a risky bet, almost an act of rebellion against the expectations of their entourage, had transformed into something that no one, not even them, could have predicted. The center now welcomed more than 100 young people each week, mainly teenagers from disadvantaged neighborhoods of New York, who came to learn floral art, urban gardening, but also to develop entrepreneurial skills, inspired by the combined experience of Michael and Emily. "I would never have imagined that so many boys would be interested in flowers," Emily admitted one morning as they prepared the center for the day. "I thought it would be mainly girls." Michael smiled as he observed Kevin, a 17-year-old from the projects, who had arrived 3 months earlier with a defensive attitude and a juvenile delinquency record, now absorbed in creating a complex arrangement for a real client, the first he had obtained on his own. "Flowers are universal," he replied, slightly adjusting the thermostat of the greenhouse they had built on the roof. "They represent both beauty and resilience, two qualities that these young people understand better than most of us." What had surprised Michael most during this year was his own transformation. The man who had spent 20 years obsessed with growth charts and quarterly reports now found deep satisfaction in teaching a teenager how to calculate a fair price for his work, or in seeing a 10-year-old marvel at the germination of a seed he had planted himself. Emily's flower shop, relocated to a larger space within the center, was also thriving. Her reputation had changed. She was no longer simply the little one who caught the millionaire, but a respected floral artist whose ethical and sustainable creations attracted a loyal clientele, including some of the personalities that Michael had once frequented in his previous life. One morning, as the golden spring light flooded the center, Michael received an unexpected call. "Michael Anderson," he answered distractedly, busy helping a group of children transplant young tomato plants. "Michael, it's Robert Turner." The voice of the former chairman of his board of directors froze him in place. They hadn't spoken since the tumultuous restructuring of the company. "Robert," he responded cautiously. "That's a surprise." "A good one, I hope," replied the older man, with what seemed to be a smile in his voice. "I'd like to see you if you have a moment." The meeting took place the next day in a small cafe near Washington Square Park, far from the starred restaurants they used to frequent. Turner, always impeccably dressed, seemed more relaxed than Michael had ever seen him. "I've been following your journey," Turner began after the usual pleasantries. "What you've built, it's impressive." Michael raised a skeptical eyebrow. You spent an entire year treating me like a madman for abandoning the company in favor of a gardening project. What's changed? Turner had the decency to appear embarrassed. Let's say I've had my own awakening, he admitted. A minor heart issue. Nothing serious, but enough to make me reflect. He twirled his coffee cup between his fingers, visibly searching for words. The company continues to prosper, you know. Differently, but solidly. Your team has implemented many of the changes you had begun. Michael nodded, waiting for the real reason for this meeting. What I'm trying to say, Turner finally continued, is that we, the board, have discussed the possibility of creating a corporate foundation to support initiatives like yours, and we'd like you to sit on the board of this foundation. Michael felt a complex mix of emotions invade him. Validation, satisfaction, but also a certain wariness. Why now? He asked directly. Turner smiled, recognizing the perspicacity that had always characterized Michael. Because you were right, he admitted simply. Not about everything, perhaps, but about the essential. Our model was unbalanced, too focused on profit, not enough on impact. And now that we see what you've accomplished, we think there might be a middle way, a way to integrate this social impact into our business model. Michael took a moment to absorb these words. A year ago, he would have given anything to hear this validation. Now, curiously, he discovered he no longer needed it. I'm flattered, he finally responded, but my place is at the center now. These young people count on me, on us. Turner looked at him with a mixture of respect and disappointment. The foundation could bring millions to projects like yours, he insisted. Think of the impact you could have on a larger scale. Michael smiled, recognizing the Michael of old in this argument, always looking for scale, growth, the greatest possible impact. A year ago, I would have been seduced by this idea, he admitted. But I've learned something important. Sometimes the deepest impact occurs on a small scale, in personal interactions that can't be measured on an Excel spreadsheet. He paused, trying to explain the transformation he had experienced. I see Kevin every day, a boy who was destined for prison, but who is now building a small business. I see Lily, who found in flowers a way to express emotions that she couldn't verbalize after years of abuse. These are singular personal stories that touch me in a way that no large-scale impact report ever could. Turner observed him with sincere curiosity. You've really changed, he noted. I certainly hope so, Michael replied with a smile. That was the whole point. We often seek to change the world before having the courage to change ourselves, he thought as he left the cafe, returning to the center where Emily was waiting for him, to that simpler but infinitely richer life they had built together. When Michael found Emily each morning in the small apartment they now shared in Brooklyn, modest compared to his former apartment, but filled with the aroma of fresh cafe latte and fresh flowers, he saw in her eyes something that had never been there before, an authentic peace. He seemed younger now at 43 than when she had met him months before, as if shedding the weight of the empire had rejuvenated his soul. The worry lines that marked his forehead had softened, and a certain brightness had returned to his eyes. You smile more, Emily noted one morning as they prepared breakfast together, a simple routine they had established and which had become almost sacred. I have more reasons to smile, he replied, depositing a light kiss on her forehead. Michael's transformation was reflected in a transformation in Emily. The shy 22-year-old who had whispered that she had never done this before had become a woman who coordinated community programs, negotiated with suppliers at the flower market without hesitation, and spoke in schools about how to find purpose through honest work. Her purity hadn't been corrupted by exposure to his world. It had been refined, become stronger, like steel tempered by fire. And he, in turn, rediscovered a capacity for wonder that he thought he had lost decades ago, seeing the world through her eyes while sharing the wisdom of his 43 years of experience. One morning, as Michael was explaining to a group of teenagers how to establish a business plan for their gardening cooperative, he noticed an unexpected visitor standing at the entrance to the room. His mother, Elizabeth, was observing the scene with an indecipherable expression. "Mom," he said, excusing himself from the young people to approach her. What a surprise! Elizabeth Anderson, always impeccably groomed and dressed, seemed strangely vulnerable in this casual environment. I thought it was time I saw this famous center that everyone is talking about for myself, she explained, with a stiffness that betrayed her discomfort. Michael invited her to take a tour, showing her the workspaces, the rooftop greenhouse, the artwork created by the young people that adorned the walls. Elizabeth remained largely silent, observing attentively, occasionally asking a technical question about funding or the structure of the program. It was only when they arrived at Emily's shop, where she was guiding a young girl on how to create a bouquet for a wedding, that Elizabeth truly became animated. "She's good," she murmured to Michael, observing the patience and precision with which Emily worked. "She's exceptional," Michael corrected, "in every sense of the term." Elizabeth gave him a sideways glance. "You really love her," she stated, as if this possibility had never really appeared to her as real before. "More than I ever imagined I could love someone," he admitted simply. They observed Emily in silence for a few minutes. When she finally noticed them, her eyes briefly widened before she composed her face into a polite smile. "Mrs. Anderson," she greeted, approaching. "What a nice surprise." The tension was palpable, but there was also something new, a quiet confidence in Emily that hadn't been present during their first disastrous meeting. "Miss Parker," Elizabeth responded with a formal nod of her head. "Your shop is charming." From Elizabeth Anderson, it was practically an effusive compliment. "Thank you," Emily replied simply. "Would you like a cup of tea? We've just received a wonderful blend of jasmine and bergamot." To Michael's surprise, his mother accepted. The three settled in the small relaxation space at the back of the shop, where the smells of fresh flowers and rich earth created a calming atmosphere. "I hear that some of my old acquaintances frequent your establishment now," Elizabeth commented after taking a sip of tea. "We have a diverse clientele," Emily responded diplomatically. "Eleanor Williams mentioned your arrangements at the last opera gala," Elizabeth continued. "She said they were revolutionary." Michael exchanged a surprised look with Emily. Eleanor Williams was one of his mother's closest friends, a woman known for her impeccable taste and impossibly high standards. "That's very kind of her," Emily murmured. A silence settled, neither comfortable nor entirely hostile, until Elizabeth broke it with a question that seemed to cost her considerable effort. "Could you teach me?" she asked, carefully avoiding their gazes. "To arrange flowers, I mean. I've always adored flowers, but I never had the time." The request, so simple yet so deeply significant coming from a woman like Elizabeth Anderson, left Michael momentarily speechless. Emily, however, reacted with the natural grace that characterized her. "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "We have a beginner's class on Tuesday mornings, or I could give you private lessons if you prefer." Elizabeth nodded, as if she had just concluded a business transaction. "Tuesday would be perfect," she said, rising. "I must go now. Thank you for the tea." As she headed toward the exit, she stopped and turned toward her son. "Michael," she said with a formality that didn't quite manage to mask an underlying emotion, "you look well." It was perhaps the most sincere compliment she had given him since his childhood. After her departure, Michael and Emily exchanged a look that was half amused, half incredulous. "Did my mother just sign up for a floral art class?" he asked, still in shock. "I think so," Emily confirmed with a small laugh. "And I think she just gave us her blessing in her very particular way." Michael drew her to him, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair mixed with the aromas of the flowers that surrounded them. "I never thought I'd see this day," he admitted. "People can change," Emily murmured against his chest. "You're living proof of that. The bridges we think we've burned can sometimes be rebuilt if we have the courage to extend a hand across the abyss," Michael thought, as he watched through the window the elegant figure of his mother receding down the cobblestone street. Autumn arrived in New York with its palette of reds and golds, transforming Central Park and Prospect Park into living paintings. For Michael and Emily, this season marked a new chapter. The community center had received national recognition, selected as a finalist for a prestigious award, rewarding innovative social initiatives. The award ceremony was approaching, and an exciting nervousness vibrated between them. "You should wear your navy blue suit," Emily suggested one morning as they discussed the upcoming evening, "the one you wore when you gave that lecture at Columbia." Michael smiled, always amused by her ability to remember such details. "And you? What are you going to wear?" Emily shrugged with feigned nonchalance. "I thought of the dress that Sophie lent me for Mark's birthday." Michael frowned slightly. You could buy a new dress, you know. We can afford it. This we was still new in their shared vocabulary. Although living together for almost a year, they had maintained a certain financial independence, Michael being conscious of not wanting to overwhelm her with his relative wealth. I don't need a new dress, she replied simply. Sophie's is perfect and it's better to reuse. This type of exchange had become familiar, Michael offering something that his former life considered a necessity, Emily gently refusing it, preferring simplicity and sustainability. What had begun as an occasional source of tension had transformed into a delicate dance where each learned to respect the values of the other. The evening of the ceremony arrived, enveloping New York in a light drizzle that made the cobblestones shine like jewels under the streetlights. Michael and Emily stood under a shared umbrella, waiting for their taxi. "Nervous?" she asked, adjusting his tie, a tender gesture that had become habitual between them. "Strangely, no," he replied honestly. "Winning or losing seems almost secondary now." And it was true. The man who had once measured his worth through awards, distinctions, and quarterly numbers had discovered a form of success that no trophy could capture, the silent but profound transformation of the lives they touched every day at the center. The reception hall where the ceremony was taking place was filled with New York's elite, politicians, philanthropists, social entrepreneurs, and celebrities who had adopted charitable causes as status accessories. Michael knew this world well, having inhabited it for most of his adult life. Emily, however, now navigated these waters with an ease that constantly impressed him. "Michael Anderson," exclaimed a familiar voice behind them. Michael turned to see Thomas Morgan, a former business rival who had become a senator in the new administration. "Thomas," he greeted cordially, "let me introduce you to Emily Parker, my partner." "Pleased to meet you," Emily responded politely, shaking the extended hand. "Ah, the famous florist who tamed the green finance wolf," Thomas commented with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "All of New York is talking about your project. Very charming." The condescending tone escaped neither Michael nor Emily, but they exchanged a complicit glance rather than taking the bait. "How's the Senate?" Michael asked, deliberately changing the subject. "I hear you have interesting challenges with the new renewable energy legislation." Thomas's face stiffened slightly, surprised that Michael was so well informed about a field he had apparently abandoned. "We're making progress," he replied vaguely. "It would be easier if experts like you were still involved, of course. Such a waste of talent." The comment was clearly intended to sting, to awaken regrets or doubts. A year ago it might have succeeded. Now Michael simply smiled. "I've never been more productive than I am now," he responded sincerely. "Just in a different field." Thomas seemed disconcerted by this serene response, evidently expecting a more defensive reaction. "And you, Miss Parker," he pivoted, staring at Emily with a calculated intensity. "How do you find this transition from simple florist to social philanthropist? Quite a radical change for someone so young." Emily met his gaze without flinching. "Not so radical," she replied with confident calm. "Flowers and people have a lot in common. Both need attention, patience, and an environment where they can authentically flourish." Michael felt a wave of pride rise in him as he observed the woman Emily had become, confident without arrogance, eloquent without pretension, perfectly comfortable in her own skin. Before Thomas could respond, the lights flickered, signaling the start of the ceremony. They politely took their leave and headed toward their seats. The evening progressed with the usual speeches and presentation videos of the finalist projects. When it came time for the Flower Center, as they had affectionately named it, Michael felt Emily's hand squeeze his under the table. The video showed Kevin, now their first official apprentice, explaining how the center had changed his life. It also showed Elizabeth, to general surprise, participating in a workshop with children, her usual aristocratic reserve temporarily abandoned as she helped a little girl create her first bouquet. When it came time to announce the winner, Michael realized with sudden clarity that he had never been so detached from the result of a competition. Whether they won or not, what they had built had already exceeded all his initial expectations. And the Social Initiative of the Year award goes to, an artificial drum roll, a dramatic pause, the Hope Light Association for its professional integration program for refugees. Applause erupted in the room. Michael and Emily sincerely joined in the congratulations for the winners, a couple of former Syrian refugees who had created a remarkable program. "Are you disappointed?" Michael asked as they applauded. Emily shook her head, her eyes shining with authentic emotion. "Not at all. Their project is incredible, and honestly, we don't need a trophy to know that what we're doing has value." This response, so simple yet so deeply aligned with the person he had become, confirmed to Michael that they had already won something far more precious than external recognition. Later in the evening, as they were preparing to leave, they were approached by Claire Donovan, the director of the foundation that had organized the event. "Mr. Anderson, Miss Parker," she greeted them warmly. "I hope you're not too disappointed." "Not at all," Michael assured her. "The best one," Claire smiled, apparently satisfied with this response. "I wanted to personally inform you that although you didn't win the main prize, our board of directors was particularly impressed by your intergenerational approach. We would like to offer the Flower Center a special grant to develop this model in other neighborhoods of New York." Michael and Emily exchanged a surprised look. "That's extraordinarily generous," Michael replied, momentarily taken aback. "It's not generosity, it's smart investment," Claire corrected. "What you've built works. We want to see it replicated." As they left the ceremony, walking hand in hand under the New York rain that had intensified, Michael felt a powerful emotion invade him. Not the familiar triumph he used to feel after concluding a lucrative deal, but something deeper, more lasting. "We did it," he murmured, stopping to look at Emily under the soft glow of a streetlight, raindrops hanging on her eyelashes like tiny diamonds. "We've just begun," she corrected with a smile that illuminated the night. "True success isn't measured by the applause we receive, but by the lives we transform, including our own," Michael thought, as he drew her to him, grateful beyond words for the unlikely path that had led them here. 1 year after that first meeting, during a simple ceremony in the community garden, they had created together, surrounded by children who now knew the difference between daisies and chrysanthemums, by neighbors who had become family, and by some members of Michael's family who were finally beginning to understand that love doesn't respect calendars. He held Emily's calloused hands and made a promise. Not of wealth or luxury, but of building each day a life that would honor the beauty she had taught him to see. And when Emily whispered again, this time without shyness, that she had never imagined that love could be like this, real, imperfect, gloriously human, crossing generations and social conventions, all those present understood that they had witnessed something truly rare. The day was perfect, the New York sky exceptionally offering a cloudless blue, like a blessing on their union. Garlands of wildflowers, arranged by the teenagers from the center, hung between the garden's trees. Kevin, now the shop's official assistant, proudly directed a team of young people who were distributing small bouquets to the guests. Elizabeth Anderson, who had gradually found her place in this new family configuration, wore a light blue dress and an expression that could almost be mistaken for serenity. She had even insisted on preparing Emily's bouquet herself, a symbolic gesture that escaped no one. "Are you sure you want this?" Michael asked Emily as they prepared to exchange their vows. "No grand ceremony, no extravagant reception, just this simple garden." Emily looked around, the smiling faces of the children, the hard-working hands of the teenagers who had found purpose in this place, the unlikely mix of guests from all social backgrounds, united by one thing, their authentic connection with the couple. "I couldn't imagine anything more perfect," she replied sincerely. The ceremony was brief but deeply moving. Instead of traditional vows, they had chosen to plant a young apple tree together in the garden, a symbol of rootedness, growth, fruits to come that would nourish the community for decades. "This tree will grow with us," Michael explained to the gathered guests, his hands covered in soil joining those of Emily around the tender roots. "It will see our joys and our sorrows, our successes and our failures. And like our love, it won't be perfect. It will know difficult seasons, storms, perhaps even diseases. But with constant care and sincere attention, it will endure," Emily added softly. "And like this tree, our union doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a larger ecosystem. This community, these children, this shared vision of a world where beauty and authenticity are valued above appearances and status." They finished planting the tree together, gently tamping the soil around the fragile trunk, then stood up, their hands dirty but their hearts full. William, Michael's childhood friend who had initially criticized their relationship, but who with time had been won over by the evident transformation of his friend, came forward with 2 simple olive wood rings created by one of the teenagers in the program who had discovered a talent for sculpture. "These rings are worth nothing on the market," William commented with an ironic smile. "But I suspect they're worth everything to you two." Michael and Emily exchanged the rings, each promising not obedience or submission, but mutual support in their individual and shared paths. When they finally kissed, sealing their union, spontaneous applause erupted, mingled with the laughter of children throwing flower petals prepared for the occasion. The reception that followed was as simple as it was sincere. Reclaimed wood tables arranged in the garden, laden with dishes prepared by the neighborhood families, wine from small producers that Michael had discovered during his explorations with Emily, and music played by a local band whose singer was the brother of one of the young people from the center. As the sun began to set, bathing the garden in a golden light, Michael found a moment of calm with his new wife, seated on a wooden bench apart from the celebration. "Would you have imagined all this that evening at the plaza?" he asked softly, contemplating the path traveled since that first meeting. Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Never," she admitted. "I was terrified, you know. Convinced I didn't belong in that world of luxury and power." "And now?" he asked, curious about her perception. "Now I know that neither you nor I truly belonged in that world," she replied, looking at the living garden that surrounded them. "We belonged here, in this space we've created together, where age is just a number, where status is measured only by kindness and authenticity." Michael followed her gaze, observing the improbable scene unfolding before them. His mother, Elizabeth, patiently teaching a little girl how to make a flower crown, Kevin discussing business strategy with William, Emily's modest parents conversing with ease with a former senator. "We've broken all the rules," he observed with quiet satisfaction. "Not broken," Emily corrected, "rewritten." As night gently fell on New York, handcrafted lanterns lit up in the garden, creating a magical atmosphere that seemed perfectly suited to this unlikely union. Michael took Emily's hand in his, feeling the simple wooden ring that symbolized their commitment. "You know what I sometimes think?" he said softly. "Tell me," she encouraged. "I think we're living proof that true love doesn't care about conventions. 22 and 43. These numbers seemed so important at the beginning. But now they seem almost insignificant," she completed, "compared to what we've built." Michael nodded, the following words coming from the deepest part of his being. "I gave you my name today, but the truth is that you've given me so much more. A new identity, a new purpose, a new understanding of what it truly means to succeed." Emily looked at him, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the lanterns and a wisdom that far exceeded her years. "And you've shown me that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the most intimidating moments, like confessing to an elegant stranger at a gala that I'd never done this before." They remained like this, hand in hand, watching the party continue around them, 2 people of 22 and 43, ready to sacrifice who they were to become who they could be together, proving that the difference between 2 decades of life became insignificant when 2 souls met in the same purpose. In the end, we are not defined by our age, our wealth, or our status, but by our capacity to remain open to the transformation that true love demands of us, thought Michael as he gently kissed Emily under the starry New York sky, their story just beginning.